My Nerd World.
And welcome to it. I'm your host, John Justice, as we talk about Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny. This will be a full spoiler review of the fifth film in the Indiana Jones franchise, and the last one, of course, starring Harrison Ford. So, if you've listened to my other podcasts, you know what a huge Star Wars fan I am, and I'm also a massive Indiana Jones fan. Those movies coming about at the same time that my Star Wars fandom continued to grow at a very, very young age. This has been a franchise that's been special to me my entire life. And while I've not been as big of a fan of the Indiana Jones series as I am the Star Wars series, I do absolutely love these films. And I will say up front, I really enjoyed Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny. I will share with you my further thoughts throughout this spoiler-filled podcast review, but it really hit all the right Indiana Jones notes for me as essentially a lifelong fan of the series. Now, I want to back up first and just talk a little bit about the first 5 films in the series. And I'll go all the way back to the first time I was introduced to the character Indiana Jones, the film Raiders of the Lost Ark. I'll never forget going to the movie theater and seeing the poster for Raiders of the Lost Ark for the first time, not knowing anything about this film. Here is now my current hero in Han Solo taking on a completely different role in this film in which the subject matter is something that I was not familiar with as a kid. I'll never forget just reading the title, because back then it wasn't Indiana Jones and Raiders of the Lost Ark. Of course, it was just Raiders of the Lost Ark. Kind of like, Star Wars was just Star Wars when it first came out, and later it became Star Wars A New Hope. But when the original Indiana Jones movie came out, it was just Raiders of the Lost Ark. Seeing the word Raiders incorporated in the font and the poster by Drew Struzan, I'll remember I was just enthralled. What is this? What a cool title. I'd never heard that word used in any sort of context, really, apart from the football team. And I wasn't even a big football fan growing up as a kid. I'm just like, wow, what a crazy title, Raiders of the Lost Ark. Now, being raised in a Christian household and then soon after finding out that this was about an archaeologist, something that I didn't really have interest in as a kid, but of course I was drawn to it because it's Harrison Ford, it's Han Solo, and he's cool. Blade Runner, very similar vibes when Blade Runner came out. A favorite film of mine. I don't think I didn't appreciate it nearly as much when I was a kid. I fantasized about Blade Runner. I had magazines about Blade Runner, but I remember the film itself didn't really grab hold of me, even though I thought it was super cool. It wasn't until later in life that I really began to appreciate Blade Runner. But when it came to Raiders of the Lost Ark, it was opening up this whole new world of adventure at a time when it was a nice juxtaposition. It was a nice escape from what I had been living in my childhood fandom of a galaxy far, far away. Here we have this film that's grounded in reality and yet has this fantasy-esque element to it, along with a MacGuffin, which is the best of all 5 films in Raiders of the Lost Ark, being the Ark of the Covenant, and something that I was very familiar with, having been raised in a Christian household. And I believe that one of the reasons, beyond the craftsmanship, the writing and directing of that film, the combination of George Lucas and, of course, Steven Spielberg, grasping on to the height of his powers as a director. The Lost Ark, in my opinion, was something that a lot of people could relate to. There was a reference point from it. If you'd gone to Bible school, to Sunday school at all, you were aware of the Ark of the Covenant. And it's the strongest MacGuffin of all the films, and in my view, for that very reason. Of course, you get into Temple of Doom, and we have a much darker tone. It's got its dark magic, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in a bit. Looking for these Shankara stones, no connection to those. You get into the the Raiders of Last Crusade and searching for the Holy Grail. I had an affinity for that and a connection to it beyond my Christian roots, but because of Monty Python and the Holy Grail. So that in and of itself I was already gone and drawn to. But the Ark of the Covenant and the original Raiders, I think, was just the perfect MacGuffin for a perfect film. Now, moving forward and looking at the rest of the series and then getting into my thoughts of Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny, we romanticize those older films as fans. We do it with Star Wars and the original trilogy. You go back, and if you watch them somewhat critically, right? If you're honest, you see the flaws in those movies. You realize that there are things in those films that say when Kingdom of the Crystal Skull came out and a lot of people would go and complain about, well, it's probably my least favorite of all the Indiana Jones movies. I do thoroughly enjoy it. But a lot of the critiques and the criticism of that film, I think, are unfair when you go back and watch those original 3 Indiana Jones movies and you begin to realize that, yeah, there's some downright goofy and weird stuff in them as well. There was a level of seriousness to Raiders of the Lost Ark that none of the movies have been able to replicate. And I don't know exactly why that is. I think the movie that actually gets closest to it is Temple of Doom, until we got to now Dial of Destiny. I think Dial of Destiny does a much better job than any of the other films, apart from Raiders, of matching the tone of seriousness, if you will, that Raiders of the Lost Ark did. Not to say that Raiders didn't have some lighthearted moments, but you get into Temple of Doom, and there's some goofy elements to it. The dark magic, the dark forces aspect of that, forces of the occult in the film, it weighs it down. It is a dark movie. I personally very much enjoy Temple of Doom. I think if you take Temple of Doom and you place it in the series timeline appropriately and use it as a prequel to Raiders, while Raiders is obviously a better film, Temple of Doom does give you a really interesting sort of backstory into Indiana Jones that lends itself quite nicely into the character that we're introduced to in Raiders of the Lost Ark. It's a lot less mature Indiana Jones in Temple of Doom than there is in Raiders, and I think you can actually, draw a connect through line through his maturity happening in Temple of Doom because of the experiences that he went through and then going into Raiders. And then you get into The Last Crusade, which is a lot of fun, but it's also downright goofy at times too. One more comment on Temple of Doom. Temple of Doom is, having watched it just recently, I went through and watched all the films again, very modest in terms of its storytelling. We're really only traveling essentially to 2 locations. The opening montage, the opening prologue in Temple of Doom is fantastic. I almost enjoy the opening prologue action sequence before they arrive in India, maybe more so than I do the opening prologue in Raiders of the Lost Ark. I just think it's fantastic. The dance sequence of Anything Goes, the bar and restaurant fight, the chase, the airplane crash, all of it I just think is absolutely a lot of fun. And those are the portions of the film that align more with Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade. And again, I love that movie. That movie is cemented in the relationship between Sean Connery and Harrison Ford. It is a lot of fun. But again, it's also downright goofy at times. It doesn't really take itself as seriously as Raiders of the Lost Ark does on a number of different levels throughout the movie. And it also boasts some of the worst special effects in the entire franchise, especially when you get into the dogfight chase sequence, starting with the arrival to the dirigible before they get in the biplane. The compositing in those shots, having watched it again, it's just plain bad. It's one of the times where I really wish they would go back and update those scenes with CGI and do special editions, because honestly, watching Last Crusade, those moments really do take me out of that film, just because those airplane and dirigible sequences they're just not good. You can tell they're working on a green screen. You can tell they're composited when they are. And it's a bummer because the movie, I think, gets weighted down in those moments because of those bad special effects. It doesn't ruin it at all. By the time you get to the end of the film and you meet the knight and they have to go and you must choose with the Grail. You forget about all of that. It really ends in such a way that, I was able to dismiss having watched it again and seeing those particular sequences that didn't look good. You kind of forget about them. And something similar happens with the Dial of Destiny. By the time you get to the end of the Dial of Destiny, you've kind of forgotten that you've been watching a 3-hour movie because they really do nail the ending. So, in terms of my ranking, Raiders of the Lost Ark being one, I'm going to put, Dial of Destiny in there with Temple of Doom and Last Crusade. I'm going to kind of move those three around simply because the way that I typically go and rank movies, it's not always going to be cemented and it's going to stay that way because a lot of it just depends on what kind of mood that I'm in. If I'm in the mood for sort of a darker Indiana Jones adventure, yeah, I'm going to pop in Temple of Doom and just chill out and watch it. If I just want to have fun, right, I'm going to watch Last Crusade. And if I want to watch a spectacular film, I'm going to watch Raiders. But Dial of Destiny is right in the mix with Temple of Doom and The Last Crusade, in my opinion. And I still do quite enjoy Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, but Dial of Destiny is a much better film and almost meets, again, the level of seriousness that you'd find in Raiders. It's a rather interesting mashup of Raiders of the Lost Ark, and I would say the Last Crusade as well. I just rewatched Kingdom of the Crystal Skull after watching Dial of Destiny, and again, it's a film that I enjoy, but it was one of those moments in time in filmmaking when, it had been many years since we had seen an Indiana Jones movie, and there was a lot of new technology that they were still working through. We kind of had dialed in the CGI, but this was when Steven Spielberg was shooting in a very distinct and particular style that put a very distinct and particular sheen across his film, across that movie, that really has been on all of Steven Spielberg's films since then. We have CGI, so let's use CGI, and they do sort of aspects of that movie. It's just like, okay, it's too much. Just because you have it doesn't mean you needed to use it. But again, I quite like that movie. I know a lot of people are very critical of the end of Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, and yeah, while it's weird, I kind of dig it. And it's relevant to the times that we're living in right now with all of the talk of UFOs and whistleblowers coming out and things crashing in Nevada and people seeing 8-foot-tall aliens in their backyard. So yeah, in terms of relevancy, Kingdom of the Crystal Skull is a fun watch, even though, again, I will put it sort of number 5 on my ranking list. All right, so let's get into Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny. I had my expectations very low for this movie. I'm a fan of James Mangold. I do really enjoy his films. Logan, Wolverine, and especially Ford versus Ferrari. That's probably one of the reasons why I was looking forward to him directing this Indiana Jones movie, specifically off of what he did in Ford versus Ferrari. But of course, Indiana Jones is a much different film. I will say that the aspects of Ford versus Ferrari that I most enjoyed ended up being very similar to some of the aspects of Dial of Destiny that I most enjoyed. And that is, the dialogue scenes in Dial of Destiny were really, really compelling. The writing was really, really good, and it almost goes unnoticed in the wake of the action set pieces, which are also solid. But the quieter moments of conversation throughout that film really, really work. So let's start off with the beginning of the film. First off, the de-aging of Harrison Ford in the prologue sequence was fantastic. Typically, when it comes to de-aging, it's tough for me to remove myself from sort of thinking about constantly what it is that I'm watching at the behest of what is being said on TV, like just staring too intently at a de-aged actor looking for flaws. And I almost started doing that at the beginning of the film, but then quickly removed myself from that and just accepted that's a younger Harrison Ford in this sequence. And once I was able to sort of disconnect myself from the thought that I'm watching a de-aged Harrison Ford, apart from his voice was still so gravelly. It was definitely the older Harrison Ford voice as opposed to the younger voice that it should have matched in the de-aged Indiana Jones. But the train sequence was just a lot of fun. And the gun gag of it firing upon the train as it turned to the corner on the tracks was just simply awesome. The dial itself was and is a very fun MacGuffin. I liked this idea that it was based off of mathematics as opposed to something fantastical. Now, it ends up leading to something fantastical, obviously. But I liked the idea that this was Archimedes' device that he had created based off of math. And it cemented a level of reality in the movie that I think was necessary when combined with the fact that there would be time traveling taking place within the film. I thought that Phoebe Waller-Bridge was a fantastic addition, as was the kid Teddy to the team being chased in the movie. I was a bit trepidatious of Phoebe Waller-Bridge. I'm not very familiar with her. The only thing that I really had watched her in was playing L7 as the motion capture and voice, of L3 in the solo Star Wars movie. But I really liked how her character came in as one person and then changed to another person before coming and becoming the character that she ends up being for the second half of the film, which I really, really enjoyed. And to a lot of the concerns going into this movie of it being, for lack of a better word, woke, or Phoebe Waller-Bridge becoming the next Indiana Jones, I didn't get that vibe at all. Would I watch a Phoebe Waller-Bridge adventure movie based in the Indiana Jones universe? Sure, but she's not going to be Indiana Jones. And in terms of some of the script choices, I didn't find anything that was overly egregious at all in the movie. It'll be very interesting to see what ends up happening in the box office with this film, because I did a podcast recently on how to save the modern blockbuster, and that is going back to sort of scarcity and taking away the ability of fan to go and criticize a film because of all the information surrounding the creation of the movie, and not just judging the film on the base of the film once it comes out, like I did when I went and saw the original Raiders of the Lost Ark. This was happening with this movie. Again, the controversies, doing that thing with my fingers, surrounding what they would be doing in the film, and are they going to try to lead to a female Indiana Jones, and is it all political now, like everything is? And it tainted a lot of people's views. Most of the individuals that commented on posts that I did on social networking talking about going and seeing the movie and giving a review were like, I heard it was bad, because we hear that every movie is bad before it comes out. So the box office this weekend has been very slow for this film. It's not doing very well out of the gate, but I'm going to sit back and watch to see, because I think this movie has the potential to pick up steam as time goes on, because it really, really is just a good Indiana Jones movie. The New York City sequence was probably my least favorite in the film. I enjoyed it. The horse in the subway and the chase worked, but I was waiting to get on with the adventure. I wanted to see Indiana Jones be Indiana Jones again. And I like the fact that they acknowledge how old Harrison Ford is. Something that Kingdom of the Crystal Skull didn't do. Kingdom of the Crystal Skull still sort of acted like that was a young Indy. Now, granted, that was quite a few years ago, and Harrison Ford was quite a bit younger at the time. He can certainly hold his own, but he's not that young anymore. I think he's 80 now? And while he certainly could go on this adventure, they did definitely address the fact that this was a much older individual who just isn't the same Indiana Jones that he was before. But I was still waiting to get to Indiana, to him to put on the jacket and the fedora. I thought the foreshadowing in the movie was a lot of fun. You had Teddy training to fly in the restaurant, which pays off later in the film. There was a puppet show in Morocco where they had dragons that were fighting Romans, and that, of course, was referencing when we go back in time to that battle when Indiana Jones meets Archimedes. The dynamite discovery on the ship before the dive, leading to that fantastic moment when they get back from the dive and Phoebe Waller-Bridge ends up using the dynamite. I just thought there was a lot of really clever writing in the film. The Antonio Banderas appearance and the The scenes as they go out on the water, they were okay. Honestly, it wasn't even the actual diving portion with the eels in the sunken ship that I enjoyed the most out of that sequence. The underwater scenes I thought were really overly dark. I imagine when I watch this at home on Blu-ray when it's released, it'll look a lot better because movie theaters are usually typically darker in terms of what you're watching on screen. So that portion of it I thought was just okay. It was the character interactions before and after the dive that I thought were more compelling in that sequence when they were out on the water. Indy revealing what happened to his son Mutt was incredibly moving. I mean, I was brought close to tears a couple of times in the film. The deciphering of the artifact was a lot of fun. The gag of setting the wax on fire, leading to Wombat and her using the dynamite as they go and escape. When we get to the Egyptian cave sequence towards the end of the movie, all of the water displacement scenes were a lot of fun. All of the mine expedition worked on every level. It was funny because when Teddy was being chased and he fell and he was sucked underwater and he ended up escaping through that rotted grate in the cave underwater, and the big Nazi guy got stuck and he handcuffed him to the grate. They never showed him actually die. I fully expected he was going to appear at some point later on. And I can't help but wonder, because typically when that happens and you think somebody's dead, but you didn't see them actually take their last breath, they come back. I'm wondering if maybe perhaps there was a sequence when he did return after they got out of the cave and they ended up cutting it for time. But when they reach Archimedes' tomb and they're discovering that he has these objects that there's no way he should have had, looking at the side of the coffin and seeing the propellers that were attached to the Phoenix and him having the watch, all of those reveals were absolutely fantastic. And the entire sequence heading towards the end, when they get on the plane, Teddy goes and gets behind the smaller plane and they go to fly through the ripple in time. I really thought it was cool and a neat sequence when Wombat got on the motorcycle and had her Indiana Jones moment of climbing onto the landing gear and into the wheel well of the plane. I thought that was a really nicely done shot, and she handled those action sequences very well. The film definitely needed that because of the fact that Indiana Jones is as old as he is and wasn't able to go and do those types of action sequences realistically. I appreciated the fact that they added the character in Phoebe Waller-Bridge playing Wombat where she could go and fill that role, and I thought she did. She did a fantastic job. Now, we get into the finale and the traveling back in time, and there was a moment right before they go through the fissure in time where I was a little bit skeptical. I knew they would not be going to where the villain wanted to go, and I really enjoyed Mads Mikkelsen. I haven't really talked about the villains at all, but I think it goes without saying him playing a really bad Nazi totally works. All of his henchmen were solid, and I just thought he was a great villain, and certainly a better villain than Cate Blanchett was in Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. So I suppose I should mention him. But there was a moment as we were going and traveling back in time where I was at first a bit skeptical, but then when you recall what these films are, and this goes back to the romanticizing that we do of the older films. You know, when you recall interdimensional aliens, dark powers, being able to remove still beating hearts while the individual stays alive, grails filled with eternal life and knights living for hundreds of years and lost arks with deadly ghosts. You know, if we go back in time, it's all mathematics. Yeah, that totally works for Indiana Jones. And I think the ending of The Last Crusade lends itself very well to accepting the fact that they went back to this ancient battle, and he comes face to face and talks with Archimedes. I have a similar complaint that my wife Melinda had right at the end of the film, and that is his Indiana Jones being knocked out by Wombat, only to wake up for the first time back in his New York apartment. Seemed like, okay, so he just slept throughout the entirety of the travel back? I mean, do we assume that Teddy flew them all the way back to New York? I thought that was a little weird. Like, I almost wish that it had been he had already been home for a while not just waking up for the first time. But again, it's a minor critique, and I have just a few more that I'll share here right at the end that did nothing to ruin the ending of the film at all. I thought it was a great send-off for Harrison Ford. Having Marion show up at the end, played by Karen Allen, was another nice touch. Really always liked her as an actress from Raiders, and she's one of the favorite parts, in my opinion, of Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. I thought she's fantastic in that film. And it was a great send-off for Harrison in the series for now. As I mentioned, I'm sure that they will be doing some type of Indiana Jones series in the future. It just won't be with Harrison Ford. In terms of any criticism that I have of the film, it could have been shorter. The car chase midway through was very much enjoyable and fell right in line with what you would typically see in an Indiana Jones movie. It was just really, really long. And as I mentioned before, the boat dive was almost unnecessary, apart from finding the plot device to find the rest of the dial. And if it wasn't for those fantastic dialogue scenes, and the especially the moment with Wombat as she's circling the room and going through where the location of the dial would be and setting up to help her and go light the stick of dynamite. If it hadn't been for that scene and the scene prior with Indy and Wombat talking about his past, that sequence you could have completely tossed out in my opinion. But again, for a franchise this old and for a director who is taking over and being the first different director of these films, I thought it was really, really good. And it has me excited for what he may do for a Star Wars movie. I think that if this movie wasn't successful, and I think just based off of some of the fan response so far, regardless of the box office right now, because the box office gets affected by so many different things. That's something that I'll be getting into later this weekend on my Star Wars podcast, which of course you can check out right here on this feed, or if you're watching on YouTube on this channel as well. It has me excited for what James Mangold can do for a Star Wars movie as well. So, again, I thought the movie could have been a little bit shorter. The other thing that I will say, and my only other criticism of the film, is the way that it was shot. It was very brown. You go back and watch the Raiders of the Lost Ark and Last Crusade. You can put Temple of Doom in this category, but Temple of Doom was so much of it was shot on set, apart from when they were traveling in the India sequences. I kind of won't include it in this conversation. But when you go and look at the way that those films were shot, it's very crisp, clean cinematography. There was a sheen over the entirety of this movie. It reminded me quite a bit of what Rian Johnson does. I've mentioned this a lot on my Star Wars podcast, but if you go and watch, especially if you go from The Force Awakens to The Last Jedi and just put frames of the film side by side, you can see Rian Johnson's cinematographer always uses a particular film setting and color palette. And this movie was very, very brown. I don't know if it was an attempt to match closer to Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, because as I mentioned, it had that sort of later part of Steven Spielberg career look to it. And watching Kingdom of the Crystal Skull right after Dial of Destiny, I realized that, wow, this actually looks kind of like that. But I just thought that there was a dingy look to the entire film. It wasn't crisp. And I know this is a choice that a lot of directors use, especially when there's going to be a lot of CGI, because it helps even out the CGI scenes. But there were moments when they were on physical location, at these amazing locations, and I'm kind of sitting back going, this could have been done via CG, and I may not have realized it. So it bothered me a bit about midway through the film, but then I kind of forgot about it. And I was thinking about this prior to the movie coming out, just because I noticed this during some of the trailers as well. But again, it wasn't anything that for me personally went and ruined the movie. So if you want to share your thoughts, I would love to hear from you, and I can share your thoughts on the film on upcoming Star Wars podcasts. I won't do a separate indie podcast with listener feedback, but typically Indiana Jones fans are Star Wars fans as well. And if you're listening to this, you probably listen to my Star Wars podcast. So if you want to leave me your thoughts about Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny, you can drop me an email, talkshownerd@gmail.com, and I'll include that in my listener feedback portion on my A Star Wars Show weekly podcast. Or you can leave a comment up on YouTube if you happen to be watching on YouTube, and I can share that again on my A Star Wars podcast that comes out every week here from my Nerd World. So before I let you go, I want to encourage you to help support my Nerd World, and if you, a friend or a family member, like to read sci-fi, I hope you will treat yourself or them with my EMBARK science fiction space opera series. I wrote the series for adults, but it's great for ages 11 and older. You can think Indiana Jones and Star Wars in terms of the adult themes and content, language, and things like that, meaning there's not any in there. 7 books in all in the series. If you like your science fiction space opera to be epic, filled with some romance and a ton of action, space battles, and whatnot, EMBARK is perfect for you. It's available in ebook, hardcover, paperback, and audiobook. Right now, I have a special going on. You can pick up the ebook trilogy, the first 3 books in the series, EMBARK, Treasure in Darkness, and The Vanishing War, all together in one box set ebook package for just 99 cents. If you go to Amazon.com and search for John, Jon, Justice, and EMBARK, or if you go to mynerdworld.net. So, support the podcast over this 4th of July holiday. Treat yourself and get some science fiction. You can follow a ragtag squadron of pilots and one reluctant hero on a journey of survival from Earth to the far reaches of space as they fight for humanity's future among the stars. Again, available in ebook, paperback, hardcover, and audiobook. And if you're interested in signed, autographed copies of the series, I can sell those to you direct for actually slightly cheaper in terms of the shipping costs of what you would buy on Amazon. So if you're interested in paperback copies signed for free, you can email me, talkshownerd@gmail.com, and I'll give you the details on how you can purchase your paperbacks from me directly. And again, I'll autograph them for free of charge and charge you the same price you would pay on Amazon, with just $5 for shipping. So email me, talkshownerd@gmail.com, if you prefer your books to be in your hand, a physical copy, just like I like my Blu-rays. So, again, talkshownerd@gmail.com. Looking forward to hearing from you and your thoughts on Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny. And thank you so much for checking out the podcast.
My Nerd World.